This cycle of suspicion and discord must end. I've come here to Cairo to seek a new beginning between the United States and Muslims around the world, one based on mutual interest and mutual respect. And I consider it part of my responsibility as President of the United States to fight against negative stereotypes of Islam wherever they appear.
The president in Cairo, the White House billed this speech as a major address to the Muslims of the world. It lasted a little over 55 minutes, was 6,000 words. Words that you did not hear in the speech: terror, terrorist, or terrorism, although the president did talk about the 9/11 attacks, and a lot of other topics. We have a lot to talk about. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard; Mort Kondracke, executive editor of Roll Call; and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Charles, let's start with you.
Well, the damage in policy was rather small. The damage to our position philosophically was large. On policy, the damage was small because the speech was so abstract and vapid and self-absorbed that it didn't touch a lot of policy, except on Iran, where he was exceedingly weak. That was the weakest statement on Iran and nukes in at least 8 or 9 years by anyone in the West. It spoke about our demand that it not develop a nuclear weapon as a kind of a misunderstanding over a treaty. But the real damage is philosophical. There was once again, over and over again, apologies and moral equivalence. At the beginning, he apologizes for colonialism and imperialism. The United States was never a colonial power or even the holder of a League of Nations mandate in the Arab or the Muslim world. And then he goes into the moral equivalence. I'll give you one example. He speaks about with Iran how, on the one hand, we had a hand in a coup in 1953, and on the other hand, they have been involved in some nasty stuff over the last 30 years. So, on the one hand is American involvement in an action by Eisenhower executing a Truman plan 55 years ago. On the other hand, you've got 30 years of ongoing terrorism against the United States and the world, the taking of hostages, the proxy killing of Americans in Iraq and elsewhere, the development of nukes, and the threatening of allies with nuclear weapons. So these are to be balanced. One other example, if I can, on women's rights, a very oblique reference to the oppression of women in the Muslim world, and on the other hand, he says he can't help himself. He has to find something in us he's got to attack. He says the struggle for women's equality continues in many aspects of American life. So on the one hand, you've got a university somewhere where the women's lacrosse team is not getting the full funding under Title IX. The other hand, you get women beaten in the street in Saudi Arabia who show an ankle, or stoned for adultery in Iran. It's not exactly morally equivalent.
Charles is fired up.
Look, I do not agree that this is moral equivalence. I think what Obama is doing, he does this often. It's a lawyerly exercise where he identifies with the views of the people that he's talking to in order to make a point about that he also wants to make. And there is balance, but I don't think it's moral equivalence. He's trying to get an argument across, trying to create a new impression of the West and especially the United States among especially Muslim youth who've been propagandized over and over again by Al Jazeera and had all kinds of negative stereotypes created. Now, I agree. He went very light on Iran, and especially on Iran's support of terrorism.
Didn't even mention.
In fact, in Egypt itself, the Egyptian government just rounded up 49 Hezbollah terrorists who were plotting to try to overthrow the government of Egypt itself, and along with some Revolutionary Guards who were their leaders. Furthermore, Hezbollah is about to take over the government of Lebanon with Iranian support. Now,
Didn't mention Lebanon.
And the whole Arab world is scared to death of Iran. Now, he should have found a way to exploit that more than he did to identify the United States as trying to resist this imperialism on the part of Iran.
Steve.
Well, on Iran, two things. In an interview that he gave leading up to the speech, he said he had a moment where he said that Iranians feel embattled about their nuclear program and almost seemed to take their side in going so far and identifying with them, which I thought was irresponsible. Then, in this apology for the coup or recognizing America's role in the coup in 1953, this was something that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad asked the United States to apologize for after Barack Obama had initially given a statement for Nowruz. Now that's going to be read in Iran as Barack Obama doing what Ahmadinejad wanted him to do. I think, for taking a broader view of the speech, the biggest problem with it was what wasn't in it, and particularly Iraq. What he didn't do in this speech was recognize what Iraq has become. He said in passing, he mentioned Iraq's democratically elected government.
To make it a better Iraq is what he called it. Not democracy. Didn't mention that.
Nothing.
He said a better Iraq.
None of that. No, he said none of that. He mentioned Iraq's democratically elected government only to make the point that he was keeping his campaign promise to withdraw U.S. troops. Now, Iraq is in many ways, in the region, the exhibit of the kinds of things that he's talking about bringing to the region: democracy, women's rights, religious freedom. Those are things that they have imperfectly in Iraq, but they have them. For him not to recognize that, I thought, was appalling.
There were a lot of applause lines built into this speech, Charles, and we're going to talk about the Middle East peace process in the next segment, but
the easiest way to get applause anywhere around the world is to attack the United States. And if you're a president, you will get loud applause, and he basked in it. The problem is that we are in a war on terror. We are in a struggle against Iranian nukes. We are also in a struggle of philosophy between our way in the West and the more extreme examples of Sharia law. And if you don't defend them unequivocally and without apology and without a moral equivalence, you are conceding defeat in advance.
The president did have some tough things to say about Israel during that speech. The panel weighs in when we come back.